It was a crisp autumn afternoon when the ambulance pulled up outside the city's most prestigious hospital. Inside was Charles Charlie Monroe, a self-made millionaire known for his towering ego and sharp tongue. He had suffered a heart attack during a heated argument at a charity gala, of all places. Ironically, the gala had been held to promote equality and unity, concepts Charlie barely tolerated. As the paramedics wheeled him into the emergency room, Charlie, pale and sweating, barked orders between shallow breaths. "Call Dr. Peterson. I don't want some rookie handling me," he wheezed. Dr. Peterson, however, wasn't on call that day. Instead, the attending physician was Dr. Michelle Carter, a brilliant cardiologist with years of experience and an unshakable calm. She was ready, as always, to save a life. When Michelle entered the room, her confident stride and warm, reassuring smile filled the air. "Good afternoon, Mr. Monroe. I'm Dr. Carter, and I'll be taking care of you today." Charlie turned his head slowly, his sharp blue eyes narrowing as they scanned her face. His expression hardened the moment he saw her deep brown skin and natural curls tied neatly back. His lips twisted into a sneer. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. "Where's a real doctor? I'm not letting her touch me." The room went silent. The nurses exchanged uneasy glances, but Michelle didn't flinch. She'd faced prejudice before, too many times to count. But something about this felt heavier. "Mr. Monroe," she said evenly, "I understand you're scared. A heart attack is serious, and time is critical. Please trust me to help you." Charlie shook his head, his voice rising despite his weakness. "I don't want someone like you near me. Get me someone else." Michelle hesitated for a split second, her professional demeanor unwavering. "There's no one else available right now, sir. If you refuse treatment, your condition will worsen. I'm here to save your life." Charlie's face reddened, more from anger than illness. "Then let it worsen. I'd rather take my chances than trust you." The words hit Michelle like a slap, but she kept her composure. It wasn't about her. It was about the man on the stretcher who couldn't see past his own hatred to save himself. She took a deep breath, steadied herself, and turned to the head nurse. "Prepare for transfer. If he refuses my care, we'll document his decision and respect it." The nurses hesitated, their eyes flickering between Michelle and the frail man on the stretcher. No one said a word, but the tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. As they wheeled Charlie toward the door, the truth of his situation began to settle in. His life was slipping through his fingers, and the only person capable of saving him was the one he had just rejected. Little did he know, life had a lesson in store for him, one that would shake him to his core. Charlie was transferred to a private hospital suite, still refusing Dr. Carter's care. His health continued to deteriorate. The strain in his chest worsened, his breaths grew shallow, and his body felt like it was on the verge of collapse. Yet his pride wouldn't let him relent. His assistant, Martin, a quiet, loyal man who had worked for Charlie for over a decade, sat anxiously by his bedside. Martin couldn't hold back anymore. "Mr. Monroe," Martin began, his voice trembling slightly, "you're not going to make it if you don't let Dr. Carter help you. She's one of the best cardiologists in the country." Charlie waved a weak hand dismissively. "I don't need your opinion, Martin. Just find someone else. Anyone else." Martin hesitated. He had seen the worst of Charlie's temper, but he also knew the man wasn't as invincible as he pretended to be. "Sir, I've worked for you for years. I've seen you fight through challenges and never give up. Why now? Why are you letting this get in the way of your life?" Charlie glared at him, though his strength was fading. "You don't understand," he muttered. "People like her, they don't belong here." Martin's jaw tightened, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "With all due respect, sir, people like her save lives every day. People like her dedicate their lives to helping others, even when they face people like you." Charlie's face darkened. But before he could respond, a sharp pain ripped through his chest. His breathing grew labored, and the heart monitor beside him began to beep wildly. The nurse rushed in, followed by Dr. Carter. She was calm but quick, her movements precise as she assessed his condition. "Mr. Monroe," she said firmly, "you're experiencing another cardiac event. I need to act immediately to stabilize you." Charlie's eyes darted between her and Martin, desperation creeping in. For the first time, his fear outweighed his prejudice. He gave a slight, reluctant nod. Michelle wasted no time. She worked efficiently, her hands steady as she performed the necessary procedures. The room was silent except for the rhythmic beeping of the monitors and the soft rustle of medical instruments. As she worked, Charlie couldn't help but notice the focus in her eyes, the genuine concern etched on her face. It was a stark contrast to the cold, transactional interactions he'd had with people throughout his life. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually, the crisis passed. Charlie's breathing steadied, and the pain subsided. Michelle stepped back, her expression calm but firm. "You're stable for now," she said. "But you'll need further intervention to fully recover. That's not negotiable." Charlie stared at her, his pride battling with the gratitude he didn't want to admit. He had been saved by the very person he had rejected, by someone he had dismissed as unworthy. For the first time in years, Charlie Monroe was left speechless. The following morning, Charlie woke up to the soft hum of hospital machines and the faint light streaming through the blinds. He felt weaker than ever, but he was alive. Alive because of Dr. Carter. That fact gnawed at him. Martin was seated in the corner, typing quietly on his laptop. When he noticed Charlie stirring, he approached with a cautious smile. "Good to see you awake, sir," Martin said, his voice tinged with relief. Charlie grunted. "Where's that doctor?" "Dr. Carter's been checking in regularly," Martin replied. "She stayed late last night to make sure you were stable. She even postponed a scheduled surgery for you." Charlie frowned, unsure how to respond. Before he could say anything, the door opened and Michelle entered, clipboard in hand. Her professionalism never wavered, but there was a calm warmth in her demeanor. "Good morning, Mr. Monroe," she said. "How are you feeling?" Charlie shifted uncomfortably. He wanted to bark at her, to dismiss her, but the words didn't come. Instead, he muttered, "Better." Michelle nodded. "That's good to hear. Your vitals have improved, but we're not out of the woods yet. You'll need surgery to address the blockages in your arteries." Charlie looked away, his jaw tightening. "Fine. Do whatever you have to do," he said curtly. Michelle didn't react to his tone. She simply nodded and began explaining the procedure, her voice steady and reassuring. For the first time, Charlie listened. Not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. As Michelle left the room to prepare, Charlie turned to Martin. "She's competent," he admitted grudgingly. Martin raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Competent? Sir, she's exceptional, and she's been nothing but respectful, despite everything you've said to her." Charlie didn't respond. Instead, he stared at the door Michelle had just walked through, his mind swirling with conflicting emotions. The surgery was a success. Charlie was transferred to recovery, where he spent several days under Michelle's care. She checked on him frequently, her demeanor always calm and professional, never mentioning his earlier remarks. One afternoon, as Michelle was reviewing his chart, Charlie finally broke the silence. "Dr. Carter," he said hesitantly, his voice softer than usual. She looked up, her expression neutral. "Yes, Mr. Monroe?" He hesitated, struggling to find the words. "I owe you an apology." Michelle didn't respond immediately, giving him space to continue. "I judged you," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I let prejudice cloud my judgment. I was wrong. And thank you for saving my life, even when I didn't deserve it." Michelle studied him for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. Then she said, "Thank you for saying that, Mr. Monroe. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong." Her words weren't forgiving in a way that erased the hurt, but they were honest, and they gave Charlie something to think about. Before Charlie was discharged, he asked Martin to find out more about Michelle. What he learned left him stunned. Michelle Carter wasn't just a doctor, she was a trailblazer. The daughter of civil rights activists, she had overcome systemic barriers to become one of the leading cardiologists in the country. She ran free clinics in underserved communities, mentored young medical students, and advocated for healthcare equality. On the day of his discharge, Charlie handed Michelle a neatly written letter. She raised an eyebrow but accepted it with a small smile. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice sincere for the first time. Michelle nodded. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Monroe." As she walked away, Charlie watched her, feeling a pang of regret and something else: respect. Months later, the world saw a different Charlie Monroe. He sold off part of his business empire to fund scholarships for underprivileged students, particularly in the medical field. He donated millions to Michelle's free clinics, ensuring they could expand their services. When asked about his transformation, Charlie would simply say, "Sometimes life sends you a wake-up call. Mine just happened to come in the form of someone I didn't deserve." And for the first time in his life, Charlie Monroe understood what it meant to truly live.